If you'd like to make your NFL games a little more interesting, you've come to the right place. It's the Even Money Podcast with Ross Tucker and Steve Fezzik.
Yeah, Vegas, baby, Vegas. It is the Even Money Podcast, of course, presented by DraftKings Sportsbook, America's #1 rated sportsbook app. They still have this deal, by the way. If you put $1 on an American and any American wins a medal, you get $100. I mean, I don't know how many contests there are left, but there's going to be more Americans getting medals. So go ahead and do that. You can always check me out on social media at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Can't tell you how much we appreciate when you rate and review the show. Cannot wait to talk with Steve a little bit later in the show about the Carson Wentz stuff. I had an initial reaction. I think Steve did as well. I don't know why they didn't move the line right away. We'll talk about what to do next, or maybe now in a little bit. We also need to get into some of Steve's preseason NFL betting tips. Next week, we'll be all over week 1 of the preseason. We actually have a game Thursday night, Steelers, Cowboys. Mason Rudolph named the starter by the Steelers. I don't know how many, probably play a series or two, but at least you know he's going to be in there for them. No chance Dak Prescott plays for the Dallas Cowboys. So we'll get to what that means for Steve, because I have heard his preseason tips before. Remember, we are less than 30 minutes every week during the NFL season. We believe that we are the best NFL betting podcast out there, primarily because we have the only 2-time winner of the Super Bowl of professional football gambling, the great Steve Fezzik at Fezzik Sports, and only at Fezzik Sports on social media. Steve, how are you?
I am good, Ross. Tackle football. We're 2 days away. We made it.
We did, didn't we? And gosh, it sounds like COVID and this Delta variant, they're trying to prevent us from our joy. But hopefully we'll get all the games in this season. They did it last year. They'll be able to do it this year. Hopefully it won't be that big of a deal. Very excited, by the way, about today's show. We don't do this very often, Steve, but every once in a while, we have a guest who is a listener that has shown enough acumen and or has an interesting enough idea that we want to bring them on the show to talk about that idea so that you, Steve, can totally blow it up and say it's the worst thing you've ever heard of and there's no math behind it whatsoever. We're joined by, and by the way, those of you listening to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, you've heard the business quite a bit. It's Chris Aronchick from SteakhouseSports.com. Chris, it's Ross and Steve. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Ross. I wanted to say you have always been super generous with your time, and even though you're now a media mogul, I do really appreciate. Can't say enough about how generous it is that you are sharing the opportunity to talk with you guys. It's a real treat. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity for me. So thank you very much.
It's not that great, dude. I mean, it's just me and Steve in our houses talking to you for like 15 minutes. Don't make it more than it is, okay? Don't make it
a lifetime. What have you been doing your whole life?
Well, that's a whole separate problem. But nevertheless, like I've been listening to you guys for 4 or 5 years at least, and so to be on the show with you, I mean, it's meeting your heroes. So it's really exciting.
Oh, dude, that is awesome. Really appreciate you saying that and voicing it. I see these people that like, I see them on the beach or something, and then they'll text me, they'll tweet me later. Were you on the beach? Yeah, I was. You should have said hi. Like, what are we doing here? I mean,
yeah.
And I get it, because there are people that are very private and like don't want you to come up to them. I'm not like that. Like I think you only live once. Like, I love meeting new people. Hey, how are you? Thank you for listening. So what you said there, Chris, means a lot. By the way, just making sure, Aronchick or Aroncheck?
It's actually Aronchick, believe it or not. Even though it's spelled the other way. Believe it or not, there's actually somebody in Philadelphia. Our family is from Philadelphia, as a matter of fact. They emigrated over and they from Ukraine. So it's Aronchick was the original spelling or set pronunciation, and then when they emigrated, it became Aronchick. So spelling wise.
Yeah, so that's how I kind of knew that, which is why I clarified. I kind of knew a lot of people that are ICK are actually X. So look at
you're
Steve,
on
did
it.
you know
You're
that?
on
You
it.
didn't even know that, did you, Steve?
But I do know where the Ukraine is, and the reason is, Ross, like everyone in my generation, I played Risk. So I know where Mongolia is.
Yes.
I know where the Ukraine is. I know where the Congo is. But if it's not on that Risk map, I have no idea where it is.
Don't forget Madagascar. Madagascar is where it's at, I think.
Nice. All right, so here's what's crazy, because we will get into Steve's preseason betting tips, and we have a lot to discuss on the Colts a little bit later. However, this is really cool, because those of you that listen to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, at the end of the show, I think we're done here, shout outs, right? So those are people that are patrons. You can all be patrons and interact with me every day, patreon.com/RTmedia. But if you pay $100 a month, you get a shout out at the end of every Ross Tucker Football Podcast, which, by the way, that's like tens of thousands of people that hear about your business, right? So what's cool, and I didn't know this, Steve, Chris has been listening all the way back, since back in the day, right? The 4-letter network days. I try not to give them any more pub than they already get, but the 4-letter network days, Chris had been listening. And back then, and I still do it now, Steve, on Fridays on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, I don't just pick the winner of the game. I pick a final score. Like I try to, and obviously I'm not trying to be exactly right, but just trying to give you a sense of what I think the final score should be. Well, Chris, I don't know, Chris, you can explain it, but you liked that enough, or you thought that was cool enough that you basically started a whole game around it, a whole app and a whole contest around that?
Yeah, and I'll try to give I could go on for hours, but I'll try to give the summary. So yeah, I was listening to your podcast, and I love the fact that you predicted the game scores, because there weren't very many people that were doing that. And right after I heard your podcast, I heard a different one, not a competitor. It was an entirely different podcast, but they were talking about the wisdom of the crowd. And Steve has referenced this a few times. And they were talking about one of the most famous stories is this ox at Plymouth in England, this county fair. They had about 800 people predict guess the weight of the cow, the ox. And the final result was like 1,207 pounds. And the actual weight was 1198. So it kind of was this sort of validating moment for this theory. And I thought, is it possible for the crowd to predict better the final score of the games? So as I was kind of thinking through this, I thought, that's more like kind of getting the score right is kind of hitting the lottery, right? I mean, it's just that no matter how smart somebody is. So I bet if you ask Steve, 1,000 times to guess the final score, you might get one right, or he'll just be smart and guess 27-24 or 27-20 every single time, because there's no real skill to it. It's just picking, some numbers. But that evolved into this idea that, so right there, by the way, when you make a final score prediction, though, what's interesting to me is that you're actually making 7 predictions at once. You're predicting the winner, you're predicting who's going to cover the spread, and you're predicting the over-under, but you're also predicting these exact numbers. And so that's how we developed this game, where you are scored, you get 2 points for winner, spread, and over-under, and then you can get bonuses for getting any number exactly right. And so that makes it a lot more fun. And what I love is that I've been in the pick'em games on ESPN, the 4-letter network, for the last 20 years. And in fact, I was in Pod Vader's, your old Sherpa, Jay Soderberg. I was in his pick'em group, way back when. And you have so many bad beats. It seemed like every week there was a bad beat, or you'd wake up, at 10:30 Pacific time and realize that like 3 of your picks are already in the toilet. But if you're making 3 predictions plus these bonuses, you can still have a really good prediction. And even though you get the spread totally wrong. So we think it's a more fun game, and we think it's a more interesting game. But that kind of led to this idea of like applying the crowd wisdom to these other lines. So I can keep going into that if you like.
Yeah. So, okay. So the basic thing, so there's 2 things. One is it's like a contest that people can participate in.
Yeah.
But 2, your hypothesis here is essentially that if 1 million people predicted the score of, let's just say, Thursday night Steelers-Cowboys game, that obviously the scores would be all over the place, but the average of that would have a really good chance of being close to what it ends up being a lot of times.
Not exactly. So, and this is important, I think, just to make sure it's clear. Like, we're not trying to get the final score right, but what you're really measuring is I think the closer question is going to be about whether there's value in the betting lines, and that's kind of what we're trying to figure out. So basically, the final score might not be anywhere close to what the final result is. But that is to say, our final score prediction might not be anywhere close to final result. But we're trying to measure whether or not the crowd prediction can find value with these betting lines, because that's really where
whether or not the average of the crowd predictions is actually better than what the spread was when the game kicked.
Exactly right. So essentially, Steve mentions his power ratings, and he has this analytical mind that can apply this, and we're trying to approximate that. We're never going to be as good, but we're trying to get to that point where, we can see if we can identify when one team is the spread as determined by the sports book is going to be a much stronger play than another team and that kind of thing. So that's where we're heading. That's what we're trying to test out anyway.
That is interesting. Steve, what do you think?
I don't think it's going to work. And here's why. The whole idea of the wisdom of crowds is, I think you've got to go ahead and siphon off the sharps. You got to have the wisdom of the sharps and what they think the final score is, and then I think it's excellent. But once you put the general population in, you're just going to have such a bias sample. Example, if you ask the entire population of the U.S., I don't know how many pounds of almonds is produced in California, all right? And you use the wisdom of crowds. There's going to be people saying 50,000 pounds and people saying, 1 million pounds. Now, I don't know the answer to this question, but I know it's a huge amount of almonds, more than anyone is ever going to guess on your wisdom of crowds, unless they're a Jeopardy finalist. So, just throwing that out, I always say, people say to me, when everyone likes one side, aren't you nervous about, playing that side? And I'm like, not when my guys all like the same thing. When the public all likes the same thing, in many ways, I would argue they talk about reverse line movements. You want to kind of look opposite that, because if the public thinks a line should be 10, their wisdom of crowds and the line's 6.5, it probably with good reason that the line's only 6.5, because the vast majority of people who are betting want to lay it, thinking that the spread is way too low.
So Chris, just to jump in here though, okay?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So there's two different things, right? Like, number one is sort of the hypothesis you're testing to see whether or not it has any value. Mm-hmm. Steve does not think it does have value.
Yep.
And maybe, by the way, maybe there's value in that. Maybe knowing that it doesn't have value, maybe it's a fade the crowd concept, right? Maybe it's the opposite. That's number one. Secondly, though, you are there's a game to this. Like that, you're using the information to try to figure out whether or not the wisdom of crowd concept has any value one way or the other. Steve seems to think it might have negative value. Mm-hmm. But for the people listening right now, it's really just a game they can play where they get to predict the score of games and have fun and win whatever. What do they win? Just points, and they can have the highest score?
Well, actually, we're doing a couple of contests this year. So, yeah, you get their weekly cash prizes, both for the individual leaders as well as like a group leaderboard that we're trying to test out.
Right. And so ultimately, you're curious to see what the data tells you about the wisdom of the crowd concept.
Right.
But ultimately, what you really want is as many people as possible to play the game, so that there's like a fee to sign up or something?
No, it's totally free. This is just it's a hobby that I'm interested in trying to pursue a little bit more, see if there's something there. But it's no fee. It's totally free.
Oh, wow. But they can win cash prizes?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I've saved up a little bit.
Chris? What, are you just handing out money for people that are signing up for free?
No, I mean, the cash prizes are not substantial, but we'd like to think that, it's $25 a week, which is for 2 minutes of work is a pretty good return on investment, I'd say.
By the way, Steve, I just off the top of my head, I think about 1.59 billion pounds of almonds are harvested per year in California. I think. I'm not sure.
So think about that, 1.59 billion. How many people would you have to ask before one person went over that number. I'm going to say it's, unless you're in an agricultural seminar or a nut seminar, you're going to have a lot of trouble finding anyone.
Okay, so do you mind if I just say one quick thing, if that's all right? So
Sure.
About that. So Steve, I believe, is totally right, and in fact, one of the areas that I feel like the crowd wisdom that currently is available when it comes to betting is you know where the tickets are and you can know where the money is, but there's no quantifiable number there. So whereas, for example, Steve's power ratings, those are 100% quantifiable, right? You say the Raiders are 7 points worse or 12 points or 50 points worse this year than the Chiefs or whatever it is. And if the spread is off of that, that's a quantifiable number. But we don't have any information about the public money, like what, we don't know anybody about anything about the people that are betting. And it's a binary, right? Which side are you betting on? So the point is that there's not as much information there. So, but Steve, I get your point, and believe me, I love hearing when people challenge the idea because it means do I have to go back to the drawing board? But anyway, that's the first thing. But the other component is that what we hope to do is that if we get enough users, we will be able to start to segment out our groups and say, okay, here are the people that are best at predicting against the spread, and here's what this segment of users say. And that's where we're really trying to get to. That would be, if we had 1,000 users, something like that. Unfortunately, it's just been friends and family, so we're like 25, 50 people. But if we can get to, this larger number, then you will be able to say, okay, the expert spread predictors predict this. And then you get a little bit closer to understanding like who the sharps are. And also you could have people that are very good at picking the spread and not good at picking the total. That's what we've seen in the past, and vice versa. So we do feel like there's opportunities to identify those two segments and start to put together. Maybe we would break out not the crowd wisdom in general, but like here's our top 10 percentile for each of these, and here's what their predictions look like. So I agree with Steve for sure. And when you see those, I was going to ask about reverse line movements, Steve. When you see a reverse line movement, do you think that's a bit of a tell that you see money pouring in on one side, but the line moving the other direction, that the sportsbook are saying this is where the sharp money's going?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it has to be. And it makes sense. If we operate our own sports book, what do we care that all these losers are betting and laying 10 on a game when we've got our guy rated A, he beats us every year, and he's taken 10?
Yeah.
Clearly, that's the right side.
So, but I was curious because my perception is that the lines are set to encourage action on both sides. So doesn't that put the sports book at risk if they're moving it in the other direction? Sure. And then it's all about the smart sports book says, you know what? We have a risk tolerance. We're going to take a $30,000 position on this game. We're going to move the line enough that's what we're going to win or lose. And obviously we benefit from the vig. The dumb sports book says, I just want to get balanced. I want to make my Theo 4.5%. That's like caveman bookmaking. Okay. And as a casino owner, and any casino owner is listening to me, that's what every sports book in Las Vegas does, except for the Circa and the Westgate. So other than those two books, you should have a meeting with your sportsbook manager and say, look, hey, I'm paying you six figures. I want you to, show me your expertise and your acumen. And if you can't,
why do you pay them anything if they're just going to balance the books? Why would you pay them anything if they're just going to balance the number? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's why they have bingo. They have Keno managers managing the sports books because that's all they do. And just an auto move computer could do that.
So, Chris, last thing,
sure.
You're a big Raiders fan.
Yeah.
Okay. And so as a bettor, you said you're emotionally invested in pretty much every game. So your only betting strategy is emotionally hedging at live or at halftime. Explain that.
Yeah, sure. So for example, when the Raiders were beating the Chiefs last year in week 6, something like that, I was betting heavy on the Chiefs. I think they were, I can't remember what the spread was, but I think they were probably either like a small underdog or maybe even a small favorite, but I was betting on them because I was like, if the Raiders blow this game, I'm going to be devastated. I at least want to make a little bit of money. So I ended up losing money, but I said, you know what, $50 to watch the Raiders. That was a highlight of the season. I still feel, satisfied that I paid $50 for that. But the thing is that like when that's why I tend not to bet, because I just feel like I'm so emotionally invested in just so many games, one way or the other, that I just I know that my thinking is clouded. And that's why I like the idea of like just leveraging the wisdom of the crowd, because the wisdom of the crowd like levels out all those loud signals, and the big, the sort of more consistent messages get through more often. So that's our theory anyway.
Very interesting, Chris. I will say this. I always pick who I think is going to win the game, obviously. Mm-hmm. But if I think it's a true toss-up, if I think it's truly 50-50 and I can't decide, I will do sort of the emotional hedge, and I'll pick the team I don't want to win.
Right.
That way I'm either right or I'm happy. Yeah. Chris, you're the man. SteakhouseSports.com. STAKE, like you have a stake in something. Yep. SteakhouseSports.com. Chris, love people like you, number one, that listen. Number two, that think I'm cool. And number three, that start something on your own like this. Best of luck. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
All right. Thanks, you guys. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Chris.
There he is. Chris Aronchick right there, even though it's ICK. Steve, it's not easy to start something. I love entrepreneurs. I love guys that have theories and try to test them. And I think it's interesting. I think that they will be able to derive some data from that if they get enough people do it. I just don't know what that data will be.
Yeah, and the challenge always is that in any one year, the person that wins is not – it really isn't predictive. It's like the World Series of Poker. Imagine if they only played for 3 hours. That essentially would be one NFL season. And so the chip leader after 3 hours is usually just a recreational player. You need a whole lot of data to finally determine who indeed is really good at this sports betting thing.
All right, Steve, let's get into the Colts here. And before we do, I should mention, speaking of listeners and participating, we have two different things going on right now. If you want to get in the DraftKings Best Ball draft in August against me and Joe Dolan, just take advantage of any of our sponsors, any of them on the sponsor page at rosstucker.com, and email me, ross@rosstucker.com, and say, Ross, I want to take you down to Chinatown on the DraftKings Best Ball draft. Let me in. And then we also have a season-long league, and there's only one way to get into the season-long redraft league. Go to fantrax.com/Ross, because that's who we're going to use for the season-long league. You know why? Because it's fully customizable. I can get rid of defenses. I can get rid of kickers. I can make the league exactly how I want. So if you want the season-long league for every single week, fantrax.com/Ross. That's how you get into it. Okay, let's get to the Carson Wentz thing, Steve. I wrote about it this week in my column for DK Nation. You and I are sharing a brain here. I mean, my first thought when the information came out about Wentz's foot, whether he was going to try to rehab it or not, as soon as I heard that he was even debating surgery or trying to rest and rehab, all I could think about, Steve, was under 9.5, under, right?
Exactly. And literally, it's Friday. It's 11:30 a.m. when I get the news, and I'm in a panic. I'm like, oh, my God, we got a quarterback that's fragile. He's missed 3 to 4 games on average over his career. He's already hurt. Brand new club, integration with the club, no backup quarterback, Jacob Eason. This number has to move. It has to move significantly. The Colts were lined at 9.7. And I'm like, it doesn't surprise me. It's off the board in most places. And then I see a few places still have 9.5. And I'm like, oh, that's not going to last. But I'll try to grab a little piece of it. Nope. I bet it. I bet it again. I bet it again. I bet it again. And then I bet it again. And it stayed 9.5. I went into my national show and I gave it out. I said, this is the dumbest line I've ever seen. I don't know why it's still been hung at 9.5. You got to play under, because if Easton had to go, you're looking at maybe 7.5 wins being the right total. And best case scenario, if Wentz came back, played week 1, and he was at 90%, he was already banged up, maybe the number should be under 9. I'd say it probably should be 9 at that point. That's best case scenario. And yet I'm listening to the media. Then I'm like, why isn't this number crashing? I listen to all the other media, and I get this whole don't overreact. Remember, we had this situation with the Jeopardy host guy, and he was supposed to retire, and he came back, and they're totally missing the mark. Quarterback is king in the NFL. It's a 4.5 point downgrade to go to Jacob Eason. And even if you have to stick with Wentz, even if you can't stick with Wentz, he's injured. Under 9.5 was a great bet, Ross.
Yeah. By the way, even if he didn't miss any games and he played, you're talking about a guy that was the worst quarterback in the NFL last year, who's on a new team, who at best would miss, the entire preseason, who, by the way, is like at his best when he's mobile on the move. He's not he's not like Phillip Rivers or Brady, like just in the pocket, get the ball out quickly. That's not what he does well. I mean, I think that they actually have a better chance now that he had the surgery. Whoever it is, Eason, I doubt. My guess is I still think they'll get somebody else who will play the first 3 games or whatever till Wentz comes back. And if Wentz is then fully healthy and ready to be himself, then that's a better chance in my mind for them to go over 9.5 than if Wentz tried to play the whole year, or even if Wentz tried to rest and rehab it. Because, Steve, let's say he tried the next 3 weeks to let it heal on its own, and then he's like, it didn't work. That's 3 more games he misses then.
Yes, but either way, they're going to go under. And anyone that thinks otherwise, I still remember when the Packers, when Rodgers would go down, they're like, look at that squad. They're still going to be able to find a way to win. And then Hundley would lose game after game after game after game. Oh, Hundley just got signed. Same theme. If you're I don't care, you got like the best squad in the NFL. If you have the worst quarterback or one of the worst quarterbacks, you win 5 games. How many times do we have to see that? Saw that with Watson last year in Houston.
All right. So we got a game Thursday night, Steve. It's the Hall of Fame game. Question is, and maybe we'll do next week, we'll go harder core into all your preseason betting tips because it'll be week 1. Everybody will have a game next week. But right now, it's only Steelers-Cowboys, and it is Hall of Fame game. What do we need to know? What are your tips for betting this game?
Yeah, one clarification. I used the Watson example. That's a terrible example. Ignore what I said. Doesn't apply. Let's go to the Hall of Fame game here. What we need to know is that this is the exhibition game. All the other games are preseason games, but this one is exhibition. You've got it starts a week earlier than all the other games, and the recent history has been under. Last 5 Hall of Fame games that were actually played, had 2 of them canceled. We saw an average total dealt just a little bit above 34. Average number of points scored, 28, Ross. So a full touchdown below what the odds makers set the number at. This is a snoozer. This is a game you don't want to get anybody injured. And frankly, if you look at the Pittsburgh Steelers under their coach, he has gone under a little over 60% of all his preseason games over his career. So you've got 2 nice trends there of the past that support the under. It's currently sitting at 33. I could only support under 33 as the way to bet the Hall of Fame game.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense on so many levels. Even if Rudolph starts, he's not playing very long. It'll be the other guys that'll play more of the game. Makes perfect sense. All right, next week, it's Steve's preseason betting tutorial. Obviously, there will be other NFL news we will dive into as well. Cannot wait. It's here. I mean, we have an NFL game to bet on this week, and Steve just gave you unbelievably valuable information. Under, last 5. Full touchdown below what the number said. That seems like a lot of value. We are going to be all over it all season for you guys. Please rate and review the show. We love those of you that do that. If you ever have a question, just take advantage of a sponsor and send it to me, ross@rosstucker.com. Other than that, good luck, everybody. Hope you guys win some money.
Thanks for listening to the Even Money Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, The Fantasy Feast, Business of Sports, and The College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.
A lot of times on the show, I mentioned DraftKings. Here's what you need to know. You got to be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. By the way, if what I was talking about included a deposit bonus, doesn't always, sometimes it does. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough, and deposit bonuses are paid out in site credit.